Okay. So if the new people to the group that recording, it only records the person, the people talking. So you're not, someone can't steal your identity with this. Well, I'm sure somebody could, but they'd have to be really good with computers. So,
That's
so, so welcome everybody. It's really good to see everyone here. And the new people, it's always great to see some new folks. So our faithful leader, Stephen, is gone this week. He's coming back tomorrow. He is alive, so he'll be back. I'm just doing a little talk in his stead. And so last week, this week I was going to explore more on this topic that we were talking about last week, the topic of blame. And I thought after the talk, I wasn't sure what I'd talk about this week, but then after a couple of days of kind of letting it sit, I thought there was a lot more to explore. So for those that weren't there this last week, what we spoke about last week was kind of how our lives are really influenced a lot by blame. This ethos of blame, ethos kind of like a way of being in our society. Blame is really almost a way of being for a lot of folks. And then we explored some ways that how blame kind of shows up in our lives. And then we looked further at kind of what underlies this need that we have to place blame, and which I suggested that it's really intimately connected to this constant need that our minds have, which are our minds operating under this kind of vast myriad of causes and conditions that span through the eons, to maintain a sense of personal control over one's life. So I wanted to expand on that more tonight and really talk more about what blame really is. We talked about how it was related to thoughts last week, but we'll talk a bit more about that and then go a bit deeper. So kind of more getting at really the essence, more of the essence, even beyond blame being thoughts. I thought this was good because blame is, like I said, it's so pervasive in our society. And yeah, I think doing a little bit of a deeper dive might be helpful. So yeah, and I think by doing this, what we can maybe do is that we can start to really look at blame a little bit more closely. And when we can do that, we can actually slowly start to bring it in more closely to us. Maybe not pushing it away so much, but also not holding on to it too tightly as well. So, I mean, all of these experiences, they're living and breathing parts of us. So, we don't want to hold on to them too tightly, because then it's almost like we're suffocating ourselves, a part of ourselves, and we don't really want to do that to ourselves. And we don't want to push it away either, because that's kind of ignoring part of ourselves too. So, I mean, and when it comes down to reality, we can't actually completely cut off these things anyways, and I'm not just saying this. I'm not just saying this based on my own experience, but even in the teachings of the Buddha, he told us, or it was written how he experienced this firsthand in his life before he had his enlightenment. So so likely many of you know, so early in his life, so after he kind of escaped from his father's palace, he practiced this. He had a couple of teachers, but then didn't really find that was helpful. So he just kind of practiced this really, really harsh ascetic lifestyle for about 6 years. really deprived himself, starved himself, all these strange things like holding his breath until he passed out and other sorts of really inhumane things. Only to realize after doing this for 6 years, very devotedly and extremely, that no level of personal deprivation, regardless of what part of himself he was depriving, would ever allow him to achieve his desired goal, which was really to find a way to eliminate suffering. And I think Buddha probably learned a lot from that experience. And what I take away from that story is that really it's true, no matter how hard we push away any aspect of our experience or try to suppress it or repress it, or no matter how hard we try to make it roll over and die, so to speak. In reality, no part of us, no matter what we do, can ever be gotten rid of fully. And actually because everything actually fully belongs in the first place. So I thought this is important to think about when we're talking about blame too, because blame and all the parts that go around the experience, they belong just as much as any other part of our experience. So that's kind of just to start things off, that that actually blame actually has to be part of our life. We can't just cut it off. Now you may be asking yourself, maybe we should just cut it off. Like maybe we just, why can't we just stop blaming each other and just start being super nice to everybody and live in complete harmony all the time. And I think that's it's important to ask that question. Why do we have situations where some people are being blamed to varying degrees and while others remain blameless? I mean, there's throughout history, there's really two categories of people: the blamed and the persecuted, and the other ones. So, to me, that's really, this isn't trivial either, but this is actually very true, that to ask the question, like, why are some people blamed, some people aren't blamed? It's very similar to asking the question, why are some things labeled as good or pleasant, and why are some things labeled as bad or unpleasant? And this is what our mind does. Our mind is, particularly the egoic component that we've spoken about, it needs to label and categorize things as being something I want more of or something I want less of. And really, this is the survival component of the ego. I mean, the ego, that's what the ego is designed for. It's designed for to try to keep, it's to try to promote our survival. And it'll say things to us like, hey, you get some more of that, or hey, you, that stuff's not good for us, stay away from it. And that's not actually so much, that's really not a bad thing, but only to a certain point. So, I'm waging a guess here that most people here, probably want to go on living. They like surviving. They like to live at least a little while longer. The thing with the egoic mind, it's just not very good at regulating, at self-regulation. So what happens, it just doesn't know where to draw the line. So it applies so what it ends up doing often is it'll apply the label of threat to many things that aren't actually a threat. They feel like a threat based on our conditioning from the past, but they aren't actually a threat. And then they, in the name of survival, label things that we need more of that, quote unquote, but actually we already have enough of it. And that's once again due to conditioning. And especially during times of stress, this whole system of the labeling that the ego does, I need more of that, I need less of that, it can get totally out of control. And I'm sure we've all experienced this, especially during times of stress where we can quickly jump to like, getting really, really, really aversive or really, really clingy or attached to even things that we normally wouldn't even really bat an eyelash about. So, yeah, I mean, this doesn't just apply to blame, this whole labeling thing, it applies to other aspects. Like, I don't know if you remember, this whole is a good example of the whole like ego going haywire during time of stress, but like at the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was hoarding toilet paper. That's kind of a good example, of like the ego is like, oh, we just have to, we need to, it's stress time, we need to circle the wagons and, try to fend for ourselves, keep ourselves alive. And I guess in modern society, that's making sure that you have enough toilet paper. This is kind of funny. So, yeah, well, the thing with this unpleasant or bad label, though, when you put that label on something that's applied to us, our mind, it automatically wants to try to stop that thing from continuing. So, and I think that's when we start to play the blame game. So, we look for the cause. We look for some sort of cause for the blame. Our mind starts scanning to try to find a cause. And then, we try to eliminate or find some sort of solution. And I just want to go into like how this kind of system that we have of assigning blame that is partly related to the ego, parts of us, parts of the mind, how there's there's a lot of problems with it. And I use that word problem loosely right now. This is actually not a problem, but there are some things that I think are misconceptions around that. So the ego, for the most part, is going haywire with mislabeling things that are threats to our survival when they actually aren't. So that's one part where it's like, okay, well, we're going to start blaming things. We're going to start placing blame based on these perceived threats to our survival when they're not really even threats. But during times of stress and due to certain conditioning, it can really feel like they're threats. Furthermore, we talked about this last week. So just the person we're blaming, just like us and every person, really has no control over their thoughts. We talked about that last week. If you sit down and watch your thoughts, you'll just notice that they just come and go. They just arise and then kind of fade away. And that also includes their thoughts that led them to carry out the action that we labeled then as being some sort of threat to our survival, and we label it bad or evil or whatever. So, and then to add more to that confusion, is it even, we talked a little bit about this last week, but is it even possible to say that with any modicum of certainty that this person we are blaming and their thoughts were the actual cause of this bad thing that happened to us? It can be very deceiving sometimes. And really, when it comes down to it, the blame game, that's anytime blame comes into the picture, it's really just a bunch of random thoughts that our mind is linking together. And that's really all it is. And I know for me that that's a liberating thing to know. But people might feel that's very confusing as well, and kind of like Alice falling down the rabbit hole. Like, what the heck? Up is down, down is up. But it's both sentiments are completely okay, and regardless of where you're lying, on on the spectrum of like, this is liberating versus this is confusing. It's a good rabbit hole to be in. And we're going to discuss a little bit further some more practical stuff about how you can go on living happily, even if you find yourself in a rabbit hole. So, and actually the rabbit hole in this case is actually reality. So, so I hope that I haven't got you thinking too much, but that's not your fault anyways, because thoughts just arise. But you might be wondering something along the lines of, well, this is all fine, like fine and dandy, that blame is all a creation of our mind, but didn't he say that blame belongs as part of our experience? And if blame, how can blame belong if it's all just an illusion created by the mind? So, and also there's the practical terms, like it still causes a lot of difficulty for everybody. And these are all important questions, and we're going to go into the practicalities in a bit, but first I just wanted to talk about it. So if blame is illusion created by the mind, how does it belong as part of our experience? Does illusion actually belong as part of our experience? So I mean, just that question, how can an illusion belong as part of our experience? It kind of almost contains the answer within it. Illusion actually is our experience. Our experience is illusion. And it's not just that blame's an illusion, it's that everything's an illusion. An illusion based on the mind. And so, and that brings me to the next point. So in order to have any experience whatsoever, there's one single kind of overarching illusion. I'm calling it a super illusion. It's the fundamental illusion, which comes down to something Stephen's spoken about before. And that's the separate self. So we spoke about the ego. So the ego is responsible for categorizing these things and trying to, keep us alive, but then it kind of goes haywire sometimes. And it's also this idea of like, there's this idea of a representational ego where we have this idea that we're this like fixed set of, where we base our identity on this fixed set of concepts that the ego chooses out, but it only selects the ones that it likes. And it thinks that that's like permanent, right? So, but this is the separate self. So this goes even one step kind of before the ego, in terms of like, the cosmology of consciousness. So, so the separate self. So we have to be able to experience separateness, actually. In order to have any experience whatsoever, we need to be able to feel somehow that we're separate from the things around us. But the truth is, underneath that feeling of separation that comes from the separate self, we have our true nature, which is complete, total interconnection and interdependence on everything else. So we have, we can't exist without everything else. And if somehow, some way we could, get rid of just one thing, the whole system would collapse. It's in complete balance. And so, in reality, we're so intimately interconnected that there's really no separation. It's just all this here, like everything. And then like we're just, and I've said this before, it's like we're one big, beautiful, living, vast ecosystem or organism. Yet, in order to be able to experience ourselves, there needs to be the possibility of experiencing separateness. And now, if you think about it from kind of in a little bit of different way, so if the only possibility was unity and wholeness, and there was no ability to experience separateness, what would happen? Well, everything would be totally homogeneous. There would just be this total homogeneity of everything. And that would be very harmonious, but it wouldn't be, there would be no experience would be possible. No experience whatsoever. The universe would just be a complete homogeneity without experience. I mean, that wouldn't be a bad thing. It's just there wouldn't be any experience. Because there'd be no ability for anything to experience something else without that feeling of separateness. So, it's kind of like that old riddle, if a tree falls and there's no one to hear it, does it make a sound? That reminded me of this. I was reminded of this riddle when I was writing this. And, this riddle points out, I feel very succinctly, the concept of relativity and how fundamental that is to our existence. The idea that a subject can't exist without an object to experience it, and vice versa. The object can't exist without a subject, and the object is experiencing the subject just as much as the subject is experiencing the object. And I mean, nothing can happen without the possibility of experience. And we know this, based on our own experience of life. Experience actually does happen. Unless like that's one of the only things that I think that I feel I can actually be certain, I can feel certain about, that I actually do have experience. If I don't feel like I have experience, then what's happening? Like that feels very empirical. That feels like the most empirical thing in the world is that I know that I'm having experience. And I'm sure everyone here as well feels they're having experiences. So experience is a very fundamental thing. And in probably the thing that like I said, I think that we're all, if there's anything we're certain of, it's that we have experience of something. What is it? Maybe we don't know, but there's an experience. There's an experiencing. So the point is that really the self and the other, those two aspects, they have no way of experiencing anything if they can't experience that sense of separateness from everything else. One way I like to look at it is like, it's like a film. So you can't view a film without a screen to view it on. And that's just like our experience of separateness could not exist without a background of wholeness to experiencing on. If you think of the separateness as being like the film projector and the film and all that, and the actual like drama that's happening in the film, if there's no screen, you couldn't see the film. And the duality of separateness and wholeness is really the basis of everything. And it's not actually a duality, it's a non-duality. Because just as the separateness can't exist without wholeness, wholeness could never know it existed without separateness. It would just be wholeness. So it's like, it's much like you can't have just one side of a coin. You need to have a coin needs to have two sides. But in actuality, it's just one coin. So, going back to the blaming part, the blaming concept. So despite it being an illusion, blame is actually nothing but a manifestation of separateness. And because of the separateness, it's really, blame has to come with a background for blame to actually be experienced. And that background is the background of its opposite, the blamelessness, which actually is wholeness. Other ways to think about it. So it's just as one can never know that you're on the right path without getting lost once in a while, just as one can never truly love themselves or others without ever knowing a state of apathy. And I say apathy because I actually think apathy is more of the true opposite to love than hate. And just as there can be no real sense of oneself without having a real sense of the other, and vice versa, if we don't know ourselves, we can't really know other people. And one must, just like all those things, one must be able to experience blame, experiencing blame, which is the unpleasant state, to experience what we'd see as the pleasant state, that being blamelessness. It's that apparent duality that's actually a non-duality. They're actually so interconnected that they are the same thing in truth. But because of separateness, we experience it as this kind of like conflict between these two polar opposites. And if going back to the screen and the film analogy, it's really, there's no really even if you go to the movie theater, there's really no separate screen or film either. It's just one system, so I think maybe that might be helpful next time. If you feel blamed or feel blaming, to keep in mind this state of non-duality between blame and blamelessness, this like undeniable interconnection. It's the same as the non-duality between separation and unity, and between self and other. Two opposites that are actually one and the same thing. So that's kind of interesting to think about. Blame is actually blamelessness. And if you think about, we talk about projections because, we project our thoughts onto the world. So the projection of your blame onto things outside of you is actually coming from blamelessness and landing on blamelessness. And when you project your blame onto another or onto yourself, it's important to keep in mind that blame is really, it's just a projection of your own mind. It's all that. It has nothing to do with anything else. Because everything that is happening, once we get beyond the labels of good and bad, pleasant and unpleasant, right and wrong, really all it comes down to that they're just happening as they have to happen. It's just really this mysterious, miraculous unfolding that's going on all the time, every moment. So it wouldn't be ridiculous to say that all this blame and all this fault finding out there, it's actually a complete, total miracle. you know, and that's kind of a helpful way to think about it. If you're really struggling with, like, you feel blamed by your boss, or like you feel like some sort of animosity that someone's at fault for something, some sort of really difficult thing that you're experiencing, that we actually need blame. We need these unpleasant things to happen in order for the pleasant parts of our existence to be. And they're actually, both those things are not different things. They're actually all a part of the same thing. And I think that the teachings that Stephen has been giving about the non-duality are trying to get us to see that with some of the meditation techniques he's been giving us, sensing into the energy of our experience, of our thoughts and sensations. So sensations are just thoughts are just sensations of the mind, or Stephen calls them secretions of the mind. Yeah, so really just trying to sensing into that energy, the energetic level of our experiences. I wanted to just, I just wanted to touch a little bit on that. It's kind of the more practical aspect of this whole thing, because it can be easy to kind of get intellectual about these concepts, but I think what I'm suggesting maybe is that next time when you find yourself finding fault or assigning blame to, we blame ourselves sometimes more than we blame others, but it equally applies, when we're working with blame, or if we if we perceive we're being targeted by blame from someone else in our lives. So what I'm suggesting, we start over the next little while, maybe start really just taking note when the blaming thoughts first arise. And but if you're going into a situation where you feel like you're being blamed all the time, or there's a lot of blame being thrown around, maybe even trying to make a special note to notice these thoughts. It's like, it's kind of like, you're entering like a like a land of milk and honey, so to speak, if you want. Lots of stuff to work with there. And then see what comes up for you, and notice in your mind and body, like Joanna was saying in her meditation there. And if you want to try we've done mindfulness techniques here, but if you want to try the non-dual awareness stuff that Stephen was speaking about, then it's kind of with your thoughts or your mind, perhaps noticing more the energetic feeling or sense of those thoughts, or the kind of the mind, what it's doing. That can be, I think, more challenging for some people than sensing the body sensations, energies. So maybe if the thought thing isn't working for you, then just labeling those thoughts as, when they arise, as thinking, and then allowing the thoughts to pass, and then dropping into the body and seeing what you notice. Because in the body, it's, you can feel things like tingling or vibration, or kind of movement of, or numb, like subtle movements. Sometimes it can just be like fasciculations of the muscles, a sense of spaciousness. Yeah, I thought it's interesting because one thing that I thought was interesting, that these are essentially, despite non-dual awareness is what we're calling these techniques, they're still mindfulness techniques. We still need to have our mind to do this. And the interesting thing about mindfulness, one interesting thing, the term mindfulness comes from the Pali word sati, which one translation is remember, to remember. And I think about that, it's like, well, one way of looking at mindfulness is we're really remembering, it's a chance to remember our true nature, to actually experience it, to experience our true, like, non-dual nature. And I want to look into that a little bit more. That's something I just thought of. It feels like must be something that at least a few monks somewhere have commented on that, right? Because I think there's something to that remembering of through that direct experience. Because mindfulness is also, like I said last week, Sharon Salzberg says mindfulness is noticing without adding. So it's really just noticing that basic experience, and that's such a portal to to experiencing our own true nature of happiness and peace and blamelessness. So I think that's all I'm going to say for tonight. And it's really, I really thank you so much for coming. And it's really, I really want to open it up. It's always really great to see everyone. This is one of the highlights of my week, always. So I'm never like, oh, I don't know. It's like I love seeing you guys. So yeah, thank you so much. And if anyone has any comments or wants to call me out on my BS or whatever, then this is your opportunity, and I welcome each and every sort of comment.
I'll call you out, Jason. Thank you. Thank you for the amazing talk. As Micah said before, I'll be the Jason that starts off by thanking you for the amazing talk. That does that usually.
That's all right, yeah.
And thank you there was a lot to think about, and my very cerebralness is going to process this, but I won't talk too much. Of course I can, but the two things that popped up for me were conditioning, and then you talked about threats. So again, without going into too much detail, from my childhood conditioning, there's a lot of things, blame, shame, guilt, worth, value are things that pop up all the time for me. I was constantly being punished, etc. So I tend to do it to myself now. Just automatically, I just blame myself. The other thing I was thinking about was you're talking about threats. And I used to make jokes about it, that when something's really uncomfortable, I like to throw somebody else under the bus, which is the most horrible expression ever. I'm so sorry, but because then that takes it away from me. And I just wrote down, because the worst thing ever for us, for our mammalian brain, is to feel ostracized or judged. And when you blame someone else, you're pushing that onto somebody else. And so when you said the threat, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I feel threatened, and my place in community and society feels threatened. So why don't I go ahead and push that onto somebody else? So there's two things that happen with me. One or the other is that I'll just blame myself, or something happens and then I want to blame somebody else. So anyway, I just wanted to say that. And yeah, you brought up a lot of points that were interesting, and thank you. The end.
Yeah, I think what struck me tonight, thank you, Jason, also. Lots of thought and preparation go into these things, and thanks for stepping up and helping lead us and keep us on track. What struck me as you were doing your talk is I kept going back to the meditation from Joanna, and I don't know if you guys got together before, but the concept of surrender and going over to blame, and how we blame, how the ego drives us to blame. It's a cycle, and it's all one, but it does cause suffering. And when we want to lessen that suffering, what's at hand is surrender. It's simply saying, blame is arising. It's going to arise. It's part of human existence. And it's painful, okay, when we're blamed. It's, if we blame, sometimes afterwards we feel bad. That's painful. Yet the way we deal with it is, in the end, surrender to it, accept it, and let it be. Perhaps if we blame someone else, maybe we could make amends to help others. And in the end, it's all fine. Because it is, and it happened. We can't reverse it. Why fret? Why add the second arrow, as they talk about in Buddhism? Why do that second arrow? Why? I love the surrender thing. It's in principle, it's easy. It's simple, but it's not easy. I always like that expression. So brilliant, you two. Thank you. We don't need Stephen anymore. Just kidding.
I'm quite confident that Stephen still has a welcome place here. But yeah, Joanna and I did not, we were not in cahoots at all. That I found that when she was doing the meditation, I'm like, well, this is perfect. This is great. So it was interesting. And I do think that the concept of surrender is a really good thing, because we just really, yeah, like you said, in the end we don't have to push anything away or hold on to anything. We can just let it, we can just, it's just this, actually. It's not even, we're experiencing things, and our minds label it as good or bad, but it's all there, and we can handle it all. One thing that I thought of this when I was doing this, kind of just, doing this talk, kind of preparing, is do you guys know the story from the Bible of the prodigal son? Where he's so it's basically like this man, like, this has two sons, and he has like an inheritance, and his younger son like demands his inheritance, and he goes off and squanders the inheritance, and he's like destitute, and he can't even afford to buy like the food that the farmers feed to their animals. And what does he do? And this is in the New Testament, he blames himself. And he says, I have it right here. He said he went, he walked up to near his father's estate, and was like looking, and he said, like, I've done wrong against my father. I don't even deserve to be one of his Like, I don't deserve to be taken back. You know, maybe he'll let me be one of his servants. And the father sees his son coming up to the gate, runs out, you know, he's like so happy to see his son, is filled with compassion for him, and like has basically gets out, you know, has a massive feast. He's so happy to see his son. And that's in the New Testament. That's a Jesus gave that parable. To me, that's like a non-dual story right there. The father welcoming back is like, that's our true nature. And he didn't blame his son, you know, his son squandered his inheritance, but and then he just welcomed him back. But yet the son, all he could think about is how he screwed up. So it's you know, but yet he had the chance to go back and then to see what, you know, to see what true nature really is, which is total compassion and acceptance, regardless of how many times you've squandered your inheritance. I think we've all squandered our inheritance. Like, you know, how many times I feel like I've squandered my inheritance. Like, I know I've certainly felt like that in the past. Yeah, but every day is every moment's a new moment to just begin again. I can tell a couple of self-made dad jokes if you want. Do you want me to tell a couple? Okay, they're really bad.
What are they again? Self-made
Dad jokes.
dad.
They're jokes that dads tell. Like, so
Oh,
in other
okay.
words, really bad jokes. Okay, and these are self-made.
Necessarily.
Yeah, necessarily. But if dads are only, especially with teenagers, they're only capable of telling bad jokes and being super not cool. Okay, why couldn't the pony sing in the choir? Because he was a little horse. And what do you call a baby that's born with pants on? Prepared. Okay, what do you call? I don't know. Did you hear about the dolphin that was depressed? Yeah, he lost his sense of porpoise.
Ba-dum-bum.
Yeah, yeah.
I like you're leaning into the mic as you're doing the punchline, Jason. That's my favorite part of that. That's hilarious.
Yeah, I feel like one of those like announcers on like late night jazz.
One of the things as I was during that kind of quiet period, I was pondering topic and not everybody here was there last week, but something I liked last week, Jason, is when you asked us each to think about a time when we were blamed about for something. And I thought that was really that's a visceral feeling. Like that's, I don't know if it's the same for everybody or just me, but boy, when I think about if I was blamed for something, there's the case where if if you know you're guilty of doing it, well, it feels bad. There's self-blame too. There's feelings of guilt, shame. But what if you're blamed for something you didn't do? That's also that's for me, that's worse. But that's an exercise that I think it's almost a good meditation to take forward for each of us, is to say, yeah, let's relate to that. Let me really personally relate to that, and then explore the themes of this non-dual nature. Like these things just arise, those feelings are going to happen, and we surrender to them, and this is part of life, and we see compassion for the blamed, the blamer, the blamed. And it's tough. It's not easy. It's like forgiving someone for wronging you, for example, forgiving yourself for something you feel you shouldn't do. Not easy. It's powerful. It's thank you very much, Jason, for this series, this theme, because it's a powerful thing, blame, and can help us all reduce suffering. Thank you.
I think I like it. I've listened to a lot of talks by Tara Brach in the past. She's a meditation teacher in the US and also a psychologist. I think she only does meditation and Dharma teaching now, but she does that a lot with her compassion meditations, that she'll actually get people to think of a situation that they're struggling with, and then she goes through her RAIN acronym. So for people that don't, for her self-compassion method, it's RAIN. So R is the recognize, A is, so A can be a variety of things, but allow is usually the most common one, and then I is investigate, N is nurture. Originally it was non-self, but Tara Brach changed it to nurture. And yeah, I feel like those compassion things are very powerful too, I think. And I'm doing some training with this a Tibetan teacher too, and yeah, they use compassion exercises a lot, and they're really big on like this, the concept of gladdening the mind. Which what I'm coming to understand is the gladdening of the mind component is really powerful, especially for people that didn't grow up like really learning to value themselves. They need to have that component. People, especially people that came from maybe tough backgrounds, really it's hard, and it's really they benefit a lot from that, those gladdening the mind and the self-compassion, and the idea that it's hard to like it's almost impossible to like accept the idea that there's no self. Like you need to have a sense of self in order to realize that it really we don't have one. So that's where the compassion comes in.
Just want to say we don't blame you for those bad jokes.
I just want to speak to the no self thing. That's something I have to be very, very careful of with, and I've actually spoken to Stephen once and another teacher about that, because I'm one of those people who didn't have a self. And they say just ignore those teachings. Like if you can't do it, if you're not able to at that point, then don't, because it can be dangerous. Yeah, that's the feedback that I've gotten. Anyway.
Yeah, I think that it can be kind of the one of those. Yeah, thank you for that comment. Yeah, I think I think my understanding is, yeah, it can be dangerous because it's you can start approaching into that kind of like despair.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard to get out of. So yeah, if it really feels like really like it's something that's not safe for you, that's fine. A Buddha had a different teaching for every group that he encountered, and sometimes the teachings would seem like they conflicted.
Oh, really?
That's how gifted of a teacher he was. So it's really whatever's serving you at the moment that you're at, I think is the good thing to go with. And I attended a weekend retreat with Joseph Goldstein too, and a couple years ago, and one person asked him, like, how do I know if I'm doing, what is the like what is the best type of meditation, or how do I know what type of meditation or something like that? And he said, well, basically my approach is whatever works. So yeah, you have to test it and see if it rings, if it sits true for you. Even if you look back at when when Buddha was first setting up his like monasteries, and he set up like a number, like he set up several like little educational things. The first one, one of the first ones, when he was setting them up, they'd be basically drawing from Indian society that was divided into like 4 castes at the time. And so you had like the warrior class, which was like the kings in the military. Then you had the Brahmin class and the merchants, and then like kind of like everyone else, just the like poor people. And the people that, and Buddha would basically said, like, anyone can come, it's open, my center is open for everyone. But the people that really came, like, and stayed and became permanent followers were really only from the warrior and the Brahmin class. And that's what, and I think the thought is that maybe that was because of this whole idea of like that those 2 classes like had a lot of privilege, and so it was easier for them because they already had somewhat of a sense of self that they can kind of let go of that. It's harder like if you don't even have that, like it's like, well, what am I letting go of? Like you know, if I just had a lot of money, then like these guys, then I'd be happy. So, you know, that's kind of that, knowing that has kind of made me look at my own privilege. And it makes you, it makes you think that like, makes me think that like, that idea of you know, kind of you know, the bodhisattva vow, or the bodhisattva ideal of devoting your life to your own happiness and the happiness of others, like it kind of makes that feel like more true, because I feel like there is an element of privilege to being able to kind of you know, to kind of like get into the teaching maybe more easily than people who've had a really difficult backgrounds. So that's been my experience anyways. Well, people, it's 8:31. It's been great. Those were my only 3 like dad jokes that were actually like maybe might make people laugh like a little bit. So I'll leave it there. So it's been great, everyone. Thanks so much, Joanna. We'll get to have Stephen back next week. Thanks, especially to our new folks, Kevin, Shirley Ann. It's really good to see you here. And everyone else too.
Thank you.
Really good to see everyone. We'll have Stephen back next week. Then after that, I'm back. So I don't know what I'm going to teach on. I think I don't know if I'll do blame again, but we'll see. I'll give you a heads up.
Thank you, Jason.
We wouldn't blame you.
Nice.
We're learning. That's good.
Thank
Good.
you.
All right, take care, all. Have a
Thanks
good night.
everyone for being there, making
Thank
this
you.
better, even better with all of us. Thank you.
Bye.
Night.
Good night.